Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections continues. We're interviewing State Representative Janis Ringhand of Evansville. She's a Democratic candidate in State Senate District 15. Janis, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you.
And a programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. I know we spoke before the primary, but always something new in the Capitol, isn't it?
Yes, there is.
Well, let's talk about, since then, the governor has announced elements of his job plan. I want to ask you about his proposal. He would like to drug test those who apply for unemployment benefits and food stamps. What's your reaction?
I'm a little bit surprised at that, especially with the unemployment, because these people have been gainfully employed. And I'm sure if their employers required it, it was done, and I can't imagine that they would change their habits that quickly. And the cost involved, I don't know who's going to foot the bill for that. That can't be cheap. I don't know what it costs to drug test someone, but I'm sure it's not cheap. And then the time involved, I don't know how long it takes to get a reading. Does your eligibility go on standby and hold until that comes through? There's just a lot of question marks out there. I just don't know that it's practical. I could see maybe if it was a long-term situation, maybe there would be a reason for it if there's been an arrest, if there's a reason to check, but just to make an arbitrary decision that everyone needs us, I just find disturbing.
He also is saying, let's extend a tuition freeze from the 26 UW system campuses to the tech colleges. I know as Janesville retools after the closing of GM how important tech colleges is to your potential Senate district. So your reaction to the tuition freeze?
I think it could be very damaging to our schools, because right now Rock County and Black Hawk Tech is experiencing an upswing in their enrollment. And if you start putting freezes on the tuition, they're not going to be able to hire the teachers that they need to conduct all these classes. And as you mentioned, General Motors closing several years ago really increased the volume at our schools. And there was a dip about a year ago, but it's back up again this year. We have the Advanced Manufacturing Technology Center, which is brand new in Milton. But it's a very needed facility. It's a collaboration between business and the schools, and they're answering the call of business to say, okay, now we know what you need, we know what you want, let's provide that training, and they're doing that. And if they're going to freeze tuition, they aren't going to be able to pay the instructors. And we know that technology instructors are in the highest demand, and they're drawing the highest wages right now.
One other
so
thing
it could be a problem.
Excuse me. One other thing that emerged is a potential deficit in the 2015-2017 biennium. Now you're aware that's awfully iffy, but still, the specter of a more than $1 billion deficit in the 2015-2017 cycle, if there was a sizable deficit, how do you think it should be closed?
Well, we certainly can't be giving tax cuts at this time, and I know no one likes paying taxes. I pay my taxes as well, but we can't start giving refunds and rebates on taxes that we have not collected. I think it was a mistake to cut taxes this past year on a proposed surplus that was not an in-hand surplus. So I think we need to be a little bit wiser about watching how that income and expense balance sheet works out. We need to be very, very careful so that we aren't getting ourselves into a deep deficit situation, and just not cutting back at a time like this. We just sometimes you just have to stay the course.
Do you think we should repeal some of the 3 tax cuts that were enacted over the last 20 months?
I would not be objectionable to that. I would certainly look at it. You know, our circumstances change all the time. Having been in local government, we had to be very careful about our budget because we couldn't kick the can down the road, as they like to say. We had to balance our budget every year, and we were very limited in what we could borrow. So we had to balance every year, and sometimes we knew we'd have a little bit of a surplus. That was okay because the next year we knew our budget would dip, and we just tried to keep it at an even plane. People don't get so excited when the playing field stays level. If they see their taxes go down, they don't really notice so much. But when it comes back up 2 years later, they notice and they're not happy. Where if you could keep that even playing field, people seem satisfied. They're not distraught because things are up and down. So I think that makes sense to do that.
Let's go through the major items in the next state budget. First of all, funding for schools. Give us again your position on choice and vouchers. The Assembly Speaker, as you know, wants to remove the 1,000 limit on choice slots statewide. Your position?
I'm not in favor of the voucher program. It takes money right off the top of our public school programs, and our public schools are struggling enough as it is. Almost every school in my district has gone to referendum recently to exceed the caps so that they have enough revenue to get through the year, and they can't afford to lose more funding. So I'm not in favor of having voucher schools expand. And another reason is that we were told as part of the legislature that when this new voucher program came in, it would not go to students who were already in private schools, and we found that not to be true. Over 70% of those vouchers that came out last year, in this last session, went to students who were already enrolled in private schools. And that was not the intent. That's obviously not helping low-income families that have problem schools. So I think it was pretty misconstrued the way it was presented, and I feel it could happen even worse in the future if we open up the enrollment and start giving vouchers to people that are already enrolled in private schools.
And one other thing that happened since we last spoke, the governor asked that the Senate and Assembly withdraw Wisconsin from the Common Core standards. Your position?
I am not in favor of that at this time. I think it's very short-sighted. Our schools spent a lot of money ramping up to be prepared for Common Core, and I think there's still a lot of confusion as to exactly what Common Core is. Common Core just basically says that at grade level 2 or 3, you should be learning these particular subjects. Here's a floor of where you need to start. It's not the ceiling. It doesn't mean you have to stop there. It just means that all students in all communities, state to state, will be getting the same level of education. And I have a very good personal example. My grandchildren, 2 oldest ones, moved to Wisconsin from Illinois about 10 years ago. And my grandson was right at the age level where he should have learned cursive the next year in Illinois. Wisconsin had it the year before. So he never had any formal training in cursive. And he really struggled with that. Where if there had been something like Common Core that says all second graders or all third graders will learn cursive, he wouldn't have had that issue. And that's Common Core addresses that. And I don't know why they're against that. I think it makes sense that students are treated the same, that they have the same education across the board, city to city, state to state. And if you want to set a higher standard, you certainly may. But we have nothing in place to replace it. Okay. And it's short-sighted, I think, to take away a structure that is there and have no structure in place.
Lawmakers and mayors and civic officials like you want the interstate widened from Madison to Illinois.
Yes, yes.
Yet the projected transportation fund deficit is $600 to $700 million in the next biennium. To widen your interstate, which cuts through the heart of your district, how do you make up that deficit?
That is just really a high topic of discussion in my district, because it is so needed and so much groundwork has been done in preparation for that to happen. And our economic development groups, our chambers, all are strongly in favor of it. And, you know, we are too. Plus our community streets are in bad shape, our rural roads are in bad shape. It's across the board. We need infrastructure upgrades. A couple years ago, a study was done to see what they could do to replace funding for the transportation fund, and nothing's been done to enact any of those suggestions. I think we need to take a serious look at what those suggestions were again and find the best way to move forward. And I think it will be a combination of programs. You can't just say, oh, we're all going to raise the gas tax and that's the only thing we're going to do. I don't think that's wise. I think you need to maybe raise the gas tax a little, raise the registration a little. I know a lot of people are looking at tolling. I don't think that's such a bad idea. And I know it's difficult because the I system is federally owned, but yet I think we should be able to work a deal with them somehow. That would be a possibility. So we need to look at all those suggestions and find a combination of issues that we can meld together to make our fund healthy again.
As you know, 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents get their health care through our Medicaid. The American Hospital Association says our Medicaid reimbursements are the second lowest in the nation. Is it time to raise them?
I think so, yes. In fact, as I was on my way into town today, I was listening to a talk radio show, and I believe they said 5 southern states that are all red that don't take excessive Medicaid coverage are closing. Hospitals are closing left and right because they simply don't have the ability to fund without reimbursement. And I fear that will happen here. If we don't have reimbursement for our doctors and hospitals, they aren't going to take those patients anymore. Those patients in turn will all go to the emergency room, which will overburden our hospitals. So we need to do something practical so that people have the health care, a maintenance program, so they aren't relying on emergency care. So there's a couple of different ways of addressing that, but we definitely need to pay attention to that reimbursement rate because it's low, and we don't want our doctors to quit taking those patients.
The bill to legalize medical marijuana will be reintroduced next session. Now the states of Washington and Colorado, as you know, have legalized recreational marijuana. Your position on both questions? On
the medical marijuana, I am fine with that as long as it's controlled and administered like any other prescription drug so that it doesn't get abused. But on the recreational end of it, I tell people I'm really conflicted on that because I understand the issues of it overcrowding our courthouses, overloading our jails, people with minor nonviolent offenses that are in jail because of it. But I have strong concerns about the addiction and the health effects. And we don't really know the long-term health effects because we haven't had legalized marijuana to be able to study it. And I think we need to see what happens in some of these states like Colorado and Washington before we rush into that. I'm not sure it's in anyone's best interest, so I'm just not convinced it's the right thing to do at this point.
It's an old issue, but it's always around in the Capitol. First offense drunken driving, should it be a crime, Representative?
I have heard from several judges and lawyers. They do not agree with that. They feel that a lot of people make a mistake. Most times it's not repeated. For those that go on to repeat offendedly, then yes, they should have harsher punishment. But one-time situation, in these days, every time you have a small infraction of the law, it follows you. It makes it difficult to get a job, to get credit, to get into school. I think we need to be a little bit cautious on that. And the same thing with marijuana, even though it's illegal, that affects people all their lives too. So that's one area that you can see, well, maybe it should be legal, because it does affect everything you do in the future in your life. And same thing with drunk driving. It follows you everywhere.
As a former mayor, I want to ask you this. If he's reelected, Governor Walker said he intends to keep tight spending controls, fiscal controls on local governments to control property taxes. That's the motivation for it. Are those local controls on local governments, you're a former mayor, a good thing?
No, I don't think so, because every community knows what's best for their own needs and how much capacity they can charge within their own community to do the things their citizens want. And I know it's extremely difficult to raise your taxes at this point in time because you're limited to the growth in new residential building or new building. And there's not much new building going on right now, but the cost of everything is going up. And it just makes it tighter and tighter for municipalities to do anything. And you'll be seeing more cuts in police officers, firefighters, road repairs. Everything will be cut if they aren't able to levy for the funds they need to maintain. And a good example is infrastructure. A lot of our communities have infrastructure, sewer and water pipes that are 100 years old. They're at the point where they're ready to fall apart. That could create serious health hazards within a community. And it also costs more to fix them if you do it in an emergency state, or if you plan and do it according to a plan, you get in bids, competitive bids, you can do it more reasonably, and when you're ready to do it, not when the emergency happens. So I think communities need to have the freedom to plan what projects they want to do and not be hogtied by the state that won't allow them to do the projects they need to do.
And lastly, do you want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent on November 4, Representative?
Well, I always refer back to my experience, and I think it's very strong. I've had 11 years in local government with just a very broad spectrum of different committees that I served on. In fact, I served on every committee except historic preservation in the city of Evansville. So from public safety to utilities to planning to finance to parks and rec. I've served on every committee, and so that really gives me a broad background. Plus, at the state level, I've served 2 terms in the Assembly and had very, broad input there too with Veterans Affairs, small business development, workforce development, urban and local affairs, and government operations. So it really gives me a broad background. Besides, I was on a hospital board for 8 years, and I've worked with our Literacy Connection, which is educational, and several other civic groups. So it just gives me a very broad understanding of people's needs and the ability to work very well with them on both sides of the aisle and for all of my constituents. So look forward to working with everyone next year.
Thank you. State Representative Janis Ringhand of Evansville is the Democratic candidate in Senate District 15. The election is November 4. Representative, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you. Very happy to be here today.
Thank you.